Good evening. So last week we were talking about kind of a transition period in Genesis between the life and story of Jacob to the life and story of Joseph. In chapter 35, we see Joseph, he crosses over to Shechem and sets up his camp there for a while. Then God calls him to go to Bethel, so he travels down to Bethel for a time. And he then leaves Bethel. He then leaves Bethel and travels down to Hebron. So just to get an idea here, is he begins up here in Shechem. He begins up here in Shechem. He travels down to Bethel, which is going to be 10 miles north of Jerusalem, basically. So this area. And he stays there for a while. That's where he sets up an altar. That's where God tells him to go. That's where he had his dream of the stairway coming out of heaven and the angels ascending and descending on it, which is really a promise for us because Jesus is the stairway and we're the recipients of those blessings through him. He travels a little further south, and as Jacob is traveling south towards Hebron, kind of just past Bethlehem, Rachel gives birth to Benjamin, and it ends up killing her during the birthing process. And so from there we see Rachel is buried, and they go down and they live in Hebron. That's where we're picking up tonight, is from Hebron. So you see, but through this you're seeing loss for Jacob and kind of transitioning. Jacob's older in years, and his sons are growing up. At this point, what we'll see in chapter 37 is Joseph is 17 years old. So just to kind of get us an idea where we're at in the point of Jacob's life, all these other things that happen now, kind of towards the end of his life, a new series of really pain. I mean, really the story of Joseph's life is a lot of pain. And a new series of pain is coming into his life, and we're going to see the impact of that. But we're also going to see Joseph being conditioned to be a deliverer for his family. So those two things are really coming up in the story tonight. So in chapter 37, we're going to see what we'll really look at tonight is two aspects of Joseph's personality. The first aspect is fairly negative. So we'll go and begin with, I was hoping the kids would be here tonight because I kind of made this image for them, is Joseph the troll. When someone's not like a literal troll, but like an internet troll or something where they just do things to annoy you because they can and they're anonymous. And that's kind of the idea. But that's really what we see Joseph being in the early part of his life. And I was kind of thinking about how do I cover this, but the narrative is intriguing and easy to follow, so I want to read a lot of the narrative of Joseph as we go through it, and also good for the younger people who have to be able to hear this and talk about these things. So let's go ahead and begin. Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 1. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, and in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Joseph. Every time you hear that, these are the records of the generations of Joseph, you know that in Genesis it means that the subject matter is going to shift to the next generation or to another group of people. Verse 2, these are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brother, the youth, along with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gather around and bow down to my sheaf." Then his brother said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us, or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, "Lo, I have had Still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. He related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept these sayings in mind. So here you see Joseph, but they're really telling this. What this does is it explains why did the brothers do what they did. And it's giving, here are the reasons why the brothers hated Joseph. One, he was a rat. So he goes out into the field, he sees his brothers doing something, he goes back and tattles to his father, gets them in trouble. Nobody likes a rat. Number two, Jacob favored Joseph over his brothers. Now this is kind of an interesting thing because Jacob suffered because of favoritism in his parents' household. And now you see him reproducing that same environment. And what does an environment of injustice do in a home? It causes brothers to hate one another. This is very important, in all sorts of circumstances. This environment creeps up. If you have a employer who does nepotism, where he favors his son or his family over other workers, where the other workers are working just as hard, but this guy gets all the recognition, all the special favors, all the promotions, all that stuff, even though these other guys might actually be outperforming him. What kind of a environment at the job is there when you're doing that sort of thing? Yeah. It's rough. Everyone's upset at that guy. Everyone talks bad about the boss. And in fact, even when I was running a company earlier on, I pushed my guys really hard. And if they didn't do what I thought they should have done, I would say, hey, look, you're not making it. You're not doing. And the environment in my company was negative because I was being unjust. And when I changed that, I figured that out. And when I changed that, it made a big difference in the culture and the environment, in the work environment. Made it a lot better. So, you start realizing that when you're acting unjust, it has an impact on any group of people who are seeing the injustice, because people know injustice. They recognize it and understand it. So Jacob favored Joseph over his brothers, gave him gifts that the other ones didn't get, even though they were out keeping their father's herds. And even that, as they were out there doing work for their father, and yet he was giving special favors to the youngest. Verse 5, you have Joseph bragging about his dreams. And here's something where you really see him being a troll. Do you know when what you're saying to somebody is upsetting them? Can you tell that? Some people can, some people can maybe a little bit less. But when someone's face is red and their teeth are bared and they yell at you, then you know maybe they're upset about this. And one of the things it says here is that verse 4, it says, they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. That tells you that there was an indication that Joseph could have picked up on, that his brothers did not appreciate what he was doing, and yet he continued doing those things. So he told the first dream, hey, what do you guys say? No, listen to my dream. Joseph, leave us alone. No, you got to hear this. You guys were worshiping me, were bowing down to me. What does that mean? And it's like you want to thump the guy, right? I mean, just hearing the story. So his brothers hated him even more. And then after the next dream, his brothers hated him even more. You just feel the tension in this family building. So what we're seeing is some immaturity, some poor character on Joseph's part, and also bad judgment and poor character on Jacob's part, where it created an environment in his home that was very hostile. So that's setting the mood for this next part of what happened. So let's go ahead and take a look in verse 13. Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said, I will go. Then he said to him, Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring back word to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him, and behold, he was wandering in a field. And the man asked him, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock." Then the man said, "They have moved from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went up after his brothers and found them at Dothan. How far do you think he was from home? So here's Hebron. Here is Dothan. So here's our leap here. How far do you think that distance is? Pretty good distance. Yeah, about 70 miles. Think about that. Think about sending your 17-year-old boy on a 70-mile each-way hike. How do you feel? Like, I feel like that's I don't know. That seems like that's a long hike to send a 17-year-old boy on by himself. But he's like, "All right, go ahead." Oh, Jim, thumbs up. You would do it? Yeah. All right. Well, Jim's on board. Anyway, you just kind of see that. But this indicates something about Joseph. You have to be organized and, thoughtful to be able to take a journey like this, right? I mean, there's some elements that go into doing this sort of thing. And his father thought, hey, this guy's capable to go and check up on the flock and see how things are going. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting element to this, where Joseph he's responsible at a young age to be able to take this sort of a journey. So let's go ahead and start in verse 12 now. Verse 15, excuse me. So Genesis 37:15. Actually, I'm going to jump down a little bit. 37:18. When they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him and to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say a wild beast has devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands and to restore him to his father." So it came about, when Joseph reached the brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into a pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. They went and sat down to eat a meal, and as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and to cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by. So they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. So here we're going to go ahead and stop for a moment. So you just see them, oh yeah, what profit is that? We're going to go ahead and sell him. And it seems like the Midianites and the Ishmaelites is pretty much used interchangeably, same group of people. So they sold their brother into captivity, sent him down. Can you imagine what that would be like if you were Joseph? Now, everyone, siblings, they don't always get along. And there are times when, if you're being particularly obnoxious, your siblings are going to be angry at you and you got to work that out. You never expect your siblings to sell you into captivity. So for that to happen, think about the injustice of that, Mike.
Their first option was to kill him.
Yeah.
The second option is not quite as bad as the first option was.
Kind of brings up a shadow of Cain and Abel in there, isn't it? Like they're jealous of the father choosing him over them and want to murder him. Yeah, and Simeon and Levi have already killed people in their temper, so you see that going on. Reuben wanted to save him, and Judah was the actual guy to suggest selling him out. But you really see that this would be a betrayal, a significant betrayal. And if you're 17 years old and your brothers catch you, I don't think they gently removed his jacket, his tunic. They probably violently removed his jacket and then sold him to slavers who don't probably mistreat people, and even later on we'll see Joseph say that I was kidnapped and sold into slavery. So he even mentions then the injustice of what harm befell him at the hands of his brother. So, but just imagine the impact that has on you. How do you feel after that? Betrayed, yeah, I mean, hurt, scared. To go from being kind of the preferred son of a prominent family to being a slave in a caravan, that's a fairly big shift in paradigm for this guy. So, you see Joseph going through a traumatic event right here. So he's sold off, and he's now with the caravan on his way to Egypt. 29 picks up what happens back in Hebron, in that region. So now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, so he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. As for me, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in its blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it to see whether it's your son's tunic or not." Then he examined it and said, It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for many days. Then all his sons, so I'm going to stop right there. So here you see the impact on Jacob now. They decided, instead of telling the truth, Reuben decided, instead of telling the truth, I'm going to go along, I'm not going to be the rat. And he didn't do the right thing, because this is a crime. It's one thing trying to bring a bad report so that you look good. It's another thing concealing a crime. And those two things are not parallel. So Reuben conceals a crime that his brothers perpetrated, and he's got to live with that. They didn't lie to their father. Do you think this is Joseph's? He'll look it over, and he's like, he's torn by wild beasts, and they didn't correct him. They just allowed him to believe the lie. Reuben, one of his errors in judgment that I think we can learn from is he went along with a bad thing in order to turn it into a good thing. Yeah, let's just put him in a pit, not murder him. It's, if we put him in a pit, then I can go save him later. How did that work out? No, better just to stand up and do the right thing. You can't use evil to for a good cause. If you try to do that, you're deceiving yourself. You need to do the right thing. Choose to do the right thing the whole time. Don't try and use evil means to produce a good result, because that can easily backfire on you. So, there's a lot of things in here that you can see we can learn from some of these things. Verse 35, this is significant because this is going to be later in the story. This particular verse is going to be a defining characteristic to the years where Joseph was in Egypt for Jacob's family. Verse 35, then all his sons and his daughters arose to comfort him, and he refused to be comforted. And he said, surely I will go down to Sheol in my mourning for my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. So here you see Jacob's grief for Joseph changed him. He was never the same. So their sin, part of the consequence of their sin, is their dad was a different man. And he was always just different after they did this. So how can you imagine seeing your dad not being the man you knew because of a lie you told, and now you can't make it right? And if you think about what happens with the brothers, it's 15 years or 13 years before he becomes Pharaoh, and another 7 years before the famine hits, and another couple years after that before they let go of the grain. So we're talking 20, 25 years later, and as soon as something goes wrong, they say, it's our brother's blood coming back on us. That's the burden of guilt they carried for all these years. covering up their sin and allowing this deception to go on. And they had to question every event in their life. Is this God bringing our brother's blood back on our heads? So you just really see that the harm that this burden of a lie they carried did to this family. So now let's look in chapter 38. Here's how I want to sum this up. Chapter 38, to me, is one of the, I don't know if cringy is a word that, I know my kids would understand that, the cringy chapter in the Bible, but just disturbing, I think. 38 is one of the most disturbing chapters of the Bible for me. It's just unpleasant. So basically, why is it in there? It actually, this particular chapter was a helpful thing for me, because it was one of those things where you read it and you're like, what can you learn from this? Like, it's just disturbing, the whole thing. It's about Judah, who has a son who is wicked, and he gets married and he dies because he's wicked, and then his wife, they need a Levirate marriage, basically, and then his next son abuses that situation, and the Lord kills him. And then his third son, he doesn't want to die, so he doesn't allow him to marry Tamar. And then Tamar deceives Judah and ends up having his child. So it's this really disturbing chapter of the Bible. Why is it in there? Because of the lineage of Christ. Open your Bibles with me to Matthew chapter 1 and verse 3. So I'll start in verse 2. It says, Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez, Zerah by Tamar, and Perez was the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. So here you see Perez as a part of the lineage of Jesus. Well, we got to have the lineage of Jesus. One of the key things that Genesis does is preserves the lineage of Jesus back to Adam. So, in order to preserve that, you have to have this chapter in there. A couple other things you get out of the chapter. One is the cultural precedent for Levirate marriage, which is included in the law of Moses. So you see some of those things coming up in Genesis. And also, just an interesting element to this chapter is in verse 7, it says, But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. Here you see God's judgment upon evil men. And God's just removing people. You go down to, what's the next verse that has that? Let me see. To verse 10. Then it says, but this talk about Onan, but he did what was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life also. So Judah is not raising good boys. He's raising wicked boys, and so bad. There's not many people in the Bible where the Lord just takes their life because they're so evil. But two of Judah's sons fall into that category. So there's a few things that are noteworthy, but overall, that's really all I want to say about that chapter. Is Perez was in the lineage of Christ, and this is sort of how Perez became part of the lineage of Christ. So let's go ahead and skip down to, so we kind of get this backstory of what was happening in Hebron and that region, Shechem or wherever they were, in that time period while Joseph was down, and you see Judah had some sons. Now we jump forward 39. It's almost like the narrative shifts to Joseph again. Jim?
It seems like that might be just very representative of how that family, that they had got themselves in a situation because of their sin, like son and brother, and so they were carrying around this guilt of their sin that they just weren't dealing with, and things were getting worse, and it was just a bad environment overall that was they were cultivating there.
Yeah, and it's injustice, sexual immorality, cruelty, abuse, like all those things are kind of brought up into that chapter. So really, yeah, you're right, Jim. It does give you a sense of what was going on with Jacob's family, and Judah here you see kind of being the, here's what it was like in that. So, and it was rough. So let's go and look now in verse 39, chapter 39. Here we see Joseph in Egypt, and just something to think about here. So you speak Hebrew. You're picked up by Ishmaelites, who I would assume speak Hebrew as well, because Ishmael was the son of Abraham, although he was also the son of an Egyptian slave, so maybe there was a bilingual thing there. But Joseph gets brought down to Egypt. I don't know if he speaks the language or not at this point. You know, if he's introduced without speaking the language or knowing a small amount of it, Abraham got along okay down there. So maybe there's some, basic ability to speak. But what would it be like for this young man brought to Egypt, humiliated by his brothers, humiliated by his conditions, being bought and sold as an object, being put into someone's house to work, and having to learn their culture, their ways, how to communicate. There's all these things that's going on with Jacob. And in addition, he's missing his father, missing his family, missing his life. So he had a rough, let's just say he had some baggage coming into this situation. But there's something else Joseph did. Two things, and maybe this is a contrast. We can go from 38 to 39. 38, you see the impact of the pain of life that Judah dealt with, driving him to sinfulness and his family to sinfulness. Where with Joseph, you see the impact and the pain of life driving him to cling to God. And really, you're going to see a different side of Joseph's character here. Where although he had some bad elements, that this test that he went through, this trial he went through, pushed him to cling to God. It solidified his faith, solidified his dependence on prayer, his dependence on provision by God. It drove him to hold to his rock. And it's interesting as you read this, the way the story is told, ask the question, who informed somebody about these parts of the story? This is really Joseph's story, Joseph's narrative. It would have had to been from Joseph's perspective, because there's details in here that no one else but Joseph could have known. So it's kind of an interesting thing that when it mentions time and time again that God blessed Joseph, God prospered Joseph, God caused everything Joseph to grow, that's Joseph's perspective on what was happening in his life as he evaluated his situation. So I just think it's interesting. It's told kind of from the perspective of Joseph, at least an interview of Joseph, if not him writing down his own story at some point, or someone writing it down for him. Because this is really tells some details that only Joseph would be able to specify on. But you also see God is infused in all of this. So let's go and start Genesis 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put into his charge. It came about that from the time he made him overseer in his house, and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. So here you see this. Not only was Joseph blessed, but Potiphar's house was blessed on behalf of Joseph. When Jesus talks about being the salt of the world, this is what salt does. Because of the righteousness of Joseph, his whole community benefited. His master benefited, who was an ungodly man, probably an idolater. But God blessed everyone because Joseph was faithful. And in this, you see God acknowledged multiple times through the course of these 6 verses, because God was the reason why Joseph was successful, and he acknowledged that. It's recognized in this. There's another thing in here. When I'm doing why can't I think of it? Premarital counseling class. I make this point because, sorry, I can't walk and chew gum, so I gotta do one thing or the other. So at a pre-marriage counseling class, what you see here is a very practical application of what it means to be subject. So in Ephesians chapter 5:22, it says, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is also the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as much as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be subject to their husband in every way." You read that and you think, oh man, that's like an under the thumb, it sounds oppressive or whatever, and maybe through the ears of our culture it might kind of feel that way. But what you see here, Potiphar trusted Joseph and knew Joseph is going to do right by me in everything. So I'm just going to order my food. Joseph gets to do the rest, and I trust him to do it. That's what being subject looks like. It's not being under someone's thumb. It's actually being trustworthy and willing to carry out the will of the person you're subjecting yourself to. And I just think this is a great example of where Joseph was subject to Potiphar in every way, and he was faithful to Potiphar even when it meant cost to him, and God blessed Potiphar's house for it. I think anyway, I just think that's good, just to give a good working concept. What does that look like? What does that mean? And really, this is a great example of that. So just something I thought I would throw in there so you could think about or maybe share with someone or whatever as that stuff comes up. So Joseph is faithful in everything. And at the end of verse 6 now, we get a little shift in the narrative because Joseph was handsome in form and in appearance. I always find it funny that the Bible talks about people's looks. From time to time, David, it says he was ruddy and handsome and I just think that's kind of, just that sort of a thing it bears on the story, but also I just think that's a little kind of funny. But Mike?
Because that's how we think. I mean, unfortunately, we often make choices and decisions based on outward appearances. Or, in some cases, it explains a circumstance that is going on. For instance, if Joseph was kind of homely and gamely looking and whatnot, you'd be asking, what is wrong with Potiphar's wife? That she's making this, coming on to him in such a way. So,
yeah.
It kind of fills in some blanks there.
Yeah, I think that, and it's just setting the stage for something. But I always find that just kind of a funny. I don't know. It always strikes me funny when I read that in the Bible. It makes you wonder what the standard is for that. Just like, but it's just given it. He's a handsome in form and appearance. This next section I really don't want to read, but I'll give you the play-by-play to some extent. In verses 7 through 20, what happens here is Joseph's integrity is tested. Is Joseph faithful? Is Joseph faithful to his master? Is Joseph faithful to God? And so Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce him. And Joseph says, how could I do this wicked thing before God? Potiphar has been so good to me. He has elevated me in my house. He only concerns himself with his own food. How do you expect me to do this wicked thing before God? And he refused. Here you see another aspect of Joseph's character where he recognizes God is who brings my success. And my integrity is part of, do the right thing. That's what maintains my relationship with God. And really, you see Reuben back there. Let's put him in a pit. Let's not murder him. Let's just throw him in a hole. And I'll go rescue him later. And that turns out bad for Reuben because he did the wrong thing to get a good result. Where here, Joseph, you see the exact opposite. You see Joseph holding to his integrity, not putting up with this adulterous woman, and holding to what's right. And you really see his integrity in this, and it's going to cost him. Sometimes, but there's a thing that I've heard is don't count the cost of doing the right thing. Just do the right thing. It doesn't matter what it costs. It doesn't make a difference. Just do it. And that's really what Joseph does here. He is an example of that. He did the right thing no matter what the cost was. He was not tempted into this, in being involved in this bad situation. And then we see something else we can learn from. He goes into the house, and the normal people who are in there aren't in there, and he's alone. And something happens where it becomes his word against her word. Now there may be, I don't know if you would challenge his integrity on this, but maybe a lapse of judgment a little bit, because this has been going on, and he allowed himself to get into a position, or maybe he was set up to be in a position. But we can look at this, and that's something we can learn from. We need to be careful as upstanding people to not put ourselves in positions where this sort of accusation could be credibly made. And that's something we can learn from, is keep yourself in a position that's above reproach, that is prevents these kind of accusations being made. So there is no my word against your word. And you can see by Potiphar's response that he, at least, although he's angry, he doesn't kill Joseph. I read something, I didn't verify it, but I thought it was, someone wrote this down as being some ancient record, where if a man was caught attempting to get into an adulterous situation, they would give him 1,000 whacks. I don't know if that's true or not, but that seems like a pretty severe punishment. And then if you actually did it, it was worse. And so Joseph just got thrown in jail for this. But either way, we see Joseph holding to his integrity, being falsely accused after doing the right thing, and thrown into prison. Imagine the ups and downs of life, right? Joseph is high on the horse. I'm having these dreams. Everyone's bowing down to me. And then his brothers sell him into slavery. Now I got to figure out how to do this. I got to deal with the betrayal, the hurt, the baggage of all that pain. And so finally, he kind of works through some of those things, starts being successful. He is elevated about as high as he can be in the position he's in. And then, by no fault of his own, in fact, through his integrity, this vindictive person makes a false accusation that is believed, and now he's thrown into jail. That's that second fall might be a little harder than the first, because you've already suffered quite a bit, and you've already kind of maybe have a little hope in there. And we're going to see that again here. So he's thrown into prison. Verse 21. Actually, I'm in verse 20. So 39, Genesis 39:20. So Joseph's master took him, put him into jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail. And it seems like, just kind of a side note, that this jail was on Potiphar's property. Because we'll see later, as they put him into jail at the captain of the bodyguard's house, and that's where Joseph was. So it seems like Potiphar was the captain of the bodyguard, so likely this was a jail that was actually on Potiphar's estate, I would probably imagine it as, and he's put into this jail. Verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail. So whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made to prosper. Then it came about after these things. So we'll stop right there for a moment. So here again, the same language. He was thrown into a bad situation. He had a lot more tools than the first time he was thrown into a slavery situation, even though it was maybe a little bit darker, probably forced labor kind of situation. But the Lord still prospered him, and he was put in charge of the whole prison. He was running the place as soon as he was put in there. But he had the right attitude, and more importantly, he had faith in God and a righteousness that the Lord blessed. So you see this relation, and what you're seeing is a relationship with God, a walk with God in this. And the Lord is showing kindness to him. The Lord sees his suffering and is showing mercy to Joseph in a lot of ways, even though, and this path, imagine each step just from now I'm accused and I'm on my way to jail. This can't possibly end good. I'm stuck here in jail. This is way worse than it was before. And so you just start thinking about that is, can God use this? Is this going to turn out for, excuse me, is this going to turn out for good? Or is this going to turn out for evil? So you just imagine moving forward, it's hard to tell. It just looks ominous. But God is working through all these things. So chapter 40, verse 1, Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, so he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials, who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. And as it was budding, the blossoms came out, and its clusters produced the ripe grapes. The Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into the Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do this kindness by mentioning me to the Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, "I also saw in a dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for the Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh off of you. Thus it came about the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, and he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So here's just this ray of hope shining into Joseph's life. But Joseph, you see another aspect. Joseph had the ability to understand and interpret dreams, which may be why he was trying to tell his brothers about his dream. He knew it was from God, and he knew it was a prophetic thing. So, you see an aspect of that where Joseph had that ability. God gave him interpretations. And I appreciate what Joseph said, is don't interpretations belong to God. Sure, this is a dream. It was given by God, but the interpretation also comes from God. We got to ask him about it. He never takes credit. He just says, the Lord will give it to me. Just as we see through that, he never takes credit for the way he prospered. He always says, the Lord caused me to prosper. And I just think that's really, we can learn from that. It's one of those things, as we can learn from that, is our life as Christians. The thing we're trying to do is to show Jesus to people by being like Jesus. We know what we were like before we were Christians. We know what we were like when we kind of get off on our own and don't do what Jesus said. And so the good people see in us, it's from God. And we can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge God prospers me. We can acknowledge that, the good things I do, I'm doing it because of Jesus. And we can be that for other people and to share that and just acknowledge him in everything that we do. Also, a lot of reasons to thank him. And it seems that as this God is being acknowledged through this, there is a thanking of God in that acknowledgement as well. So here in chapter 41 now, we have 41:1. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years. 2 years later. So he was already in there, and then they came in, they were there for a while, and 2 years later, so you're starting to see this timeline just tick away. And Joseph is, he's going through life in prison right now. It says, now at the end of 2 years it happened that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, I don't want to read this first part of the dream. Let me see if I didn't write that on my notes. But Pharaoh had a dream. I don't want to read the first time because it tells the dream twice in this chapter, and we don't need to read it twice. I think you get it after the first time through. But Pharaoh has this dream, and in verse 8 it says, now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servant, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night. He and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us, to each one according to its own interpretation. And just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to the Pharaoh. I think that particular verse, it kind of gives a concept of what was his living condition. Well, he was not shaving, and he wasn't wearing, acceptable clothes to go visit the Pharaoh. So his standard of life was not high in this prison. And I think if you wanted a side note, I think it's Psalm 105. It describes Joseph's imprisonment as being chained and in a pit. So you can get some insight into Joseph's imprisonment in Psalm 105. 41:15. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable interpretation or a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke the dream. In my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, and as I had never seen in ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and the ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly before. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears full and good came up of the single stalk. And lo, 7 ears, withered and thin, scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told the Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it is very severe. Now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt into 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to the servants, Can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and according to your command all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him with garments of fine linen, and put a gold necklace around him. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, Bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife, and Joseph went forth over all the land of Egypt. Now, for 46 it says, Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So here you get the timeline. 13 years. 13 years of hardship before God put him in the position that he said he would put him in from the very beginning. And you really see this as, it's interesting where we'll look, if you read a little bit forward, he had some sons, and one was named Forgotten because the Lord has caused him to forget his hardship because of his blessings. And the other one was Forgotten, and one was, anyway, I can't recall what the two names mean, but they both had to do with recognizing God's blessing. One was removing pain, one was the adding of blessing. And you see Joseph, finally, he can see, God put me here for a reason. And in the future, he's going to say, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Jim? Fruitful. Forgotten and fruitful. Thank you. Yeah, so you see those two concepts where, Joseph had to go through some 13 hard years. But at the end of 13 hard years, he was able to see, well, God was working in all of this to put me in a position not just to deliver Egypt, but also to deliver his family, which he'll discover in these next few chapters. I just find this is an encouraging thing. There's so many things we can learn from. And, at the end of this, there's also a lot of parallels for what happened to Joseph and the story of Jesus and what Jesus did for us. It helps us to see some of those things as well. But we'll go ahead and get into that in the next few chapters. Any thoughts or comments before we end for tonight, Larry?
I think sometimes when we think of our own suffering, whatever that looks like, we think, man, this is going on forever. When maybe it's a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, but then you look at Joseph. 13 years
Yeah.
before he actually, I guess really began to experience whatever God had in store for him for his restoration. So
Yeah.
we need to be patient.
And those 13 years prepared him. They prepared him spiritually. They prepared him in wisdom, learning to manage Potiphar's house probably gave him a lot of experience. And I don't know if he had time to think about, here's the plan, or if that was just off the top of his head. But, you really see he grew in wisdom. He grew in his ability to manage things and to address a Pharaoh in a respectable and impressive way. You see, he grew from a young man to a leader, really. Mike?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because, we got the 13 years, but we don't know exactly how that 13 years, what it took. In other words, how long did it take him to rise up in Potiphar's house? He rose up there, obviously, and we don't know how long he was there. And then he gets slapped down. And I think that's a point I'd like to make is sometimes we don't understand that when we get, rise up to a certain level and then we just get the curtain or the rug yanked out from under us and we got to start all over again. And sometimes we just, don't deal with those kind of scenarios very well. And here Joseph, and again, don't know exactly how he dealt with it initially, but obviously he did deal with it correctly eventually.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah. Jim?
We also look at the things that Joseph lost, how he lost his family, was kidnapped and sold to slavery. But really, God delivered him from his family. God delivered him from that situation where if he had stayed there, who knows what would have happened between him and his brothers. And who knows what would have happened to his character if he would have gone down and the wrong road with the influence, whatever was causing them to be going into sin, if he would have been conformed to that. Also, we see his loss of his position in Potiphar's house, but he was delivered from Potiphar's house because that was a hostile work environment, if you will.
Yeah.
That was a place where it was just waiting. Sin was lurking for him there. And so God delivered him from that. And when we have situations of loss in our lives, we need to look at it the same way, as saying, what is the positive? What am I being delivered from? And how can I use this for growth and to be more Christ-like?
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective, just that idea of God did deliver him from a lot of situations. So even though there was good in there, there was also challenges, and the Lord spared him from those things. And this is also that idea of, do I trust God to put me where he needs me? And do I trust God to be with me in all these situations? And that's really was the challenge for Joseph, and he trusted God. You see his strong affirmation of who God is, his goodness, and his help in all these situations. And you can learn from that is, what Jim said is, trust. Yeah, he's doing right by us here. So, any other thoughts before we close? Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer.